Welcome to The Point. Very exciting program today. Today and the next program, we're going to be talking about the Shroud of Turin. And I'm going to invite you to make up your own mind. I'm going to ask you to please not listen to what everybody else says, because virtually everybody on the planet thinks the Shroud of Turin is a fraud. I'm going to tell you in about 3 minutes' time why it couldn't possibly be a fraud. I want you to look at the first photograph. That is a picture you've probably seen. It's the photo-positive image of the actual image on the shroud. I'll explain that in a moment. If that is the face of Jesus Christ, then the next picture, image number 1, is the face of Jesus. So what we're going to be doing now is describing what happened after the crucifixion, how Jesus was buried, in what sort of burial clothes he was buried according to the actual words in the scriptures. And we're going to talk about radiocarbon dating. And I'm not saying that the radiocarbon dating is wrong. I actually think it is perfectly correct. It shows that the Shroud of Turin is very radioactive. I think it's simply been misinterpreted by the scientists who did it. It is very radioactive because it's been through the resurrection. Now, I personally believe the Shroud of Turin, without a doubt, scientifically proves the resurrection of Jesus Christ. However, I want you to make up your own mind, but please keep an open mind on this subject. So we're going to quickly move through this. It is quite a long subject, which is why it takes two programs to explain it to all. The next picture is image number 2. Jesus appeared to Mary after the resurrection. You remember, Mary didn't immediately recognize Jesus Christ. And I think it's the same with the Shroud of Turin. People don't instantly recognize Jesus Christ. In fact, I think the Shroud of Turin is a parable. I think the Shroud of Turin is a parable, a scientific parable, which actually only genuine believers in the Bible will ever understand. Because most people see the Shroud of Turin, they look, but they don't really see, and they hear about it, but they don't understand. So I want you to look and see and understand about the Shroud of Turin. I hope you find that exciting. I want you to play Sherlock Holmes with me. All right, let's move on now. The next picture, image number 3, is what the Shroud of Turin actually looks like. It's a piece of ancient linen. It's actually 14 foot 3 inches long and 3 foot 7 inches wide. It is currently kept in Italy, in Turin Cathedral. But it's only been there for the last 400 years. So if it is the Shroud of Jesus Christ, it's only been there for 20% of its lifetime. It actually has the photo-negative image of a scourged and crucified man. And what we're going to try and do is try and work out how that image got there and who that could be. Now, the next image, number 4, is to explain to you what photo-negative and photo-positive is, because a lot of people now use digital cameras and don't really understand about photo-positive and photo-negative. On the right, we have an ordinary picture of Robert Louis Stevenson. On the left, we have a photo-negative image of him, and you'll notice that all the black has now become white, and all the white has now become black. That is what photo-positive and photo-negative means. In the old days, we had cameras. This is before digital cameras arrived, and we took photographs. And when we got the photographs back from the chemist, you had a little strip of negatives with them. And that's what they look like. Next one, please. That's number 6. On the left, you can see a photo negative image on the shroud, and on the in 1898, Secondo Pio took a photograph, and on the right you can see what he actually saw, which is a photo-positive image of the image on the left, and it astounded him. I think it is an astounding image. So let's move on to the next one, image number 7. Now, the great controversy is who exactly created or supposedly created this shroud. Now, it's supposed to be, according to carbon dating, it's supposed to be medieval. And most people seem to think that the most intelligent man around at the time was Leonardo da Vinci, who's on the left. Leonardo da Vinci lived from 1452 to 1519, and the question is, could he have created the Shroud of Turin? He certainly was a very, very intelligent person. Highly gifted scientist, artist, and a lot more besides. Image number 8, he actually did have a camera obscura, which is a fairly primitive camera, but one big but, what it couldn't do is image number 9, it couldn't create a three-dimensional image of the face of Jesus Christ on the shroud. We need image number 9 up so that we know what we're talking about. Okay, I'll explain that the Shroud of Turin has encoded in it a three-dimensional information, and nobody knows how it got there, and nobody can do it today. So there is a three-dimensional image of the face, I believe, of Jesus Christ. Let's look at the next picture, number 10. There is a three-dimensional image of the body of Jesus Christ taken from the Shroud of Turin. Now, that is why I don't think it is at all possible that Leonardo da Vinci or anybody else created the Shroud of Turin. In other words, I don't think it could possibly be a fraud. Let's look at the next picture, image number 11. There are the hands on the Shroud of Turin, and as you can see, they look like X-rays. Well, X-rays have only been around for about 100 years. Leonardo da Vinci didn't have access to X-ray technology, and I can't understand how a medieval forger could possibly do something with X-rays on it. Right, let's move on. And I want to tell you next about image number 12, which is a VP8 image analyzing computer. Now, this was designed during the space research program during the late 60s and early 70s. And I want to explain to you what the VP8 image analyzing computer actually did. If you look at the next picture now, image number 13, what we have there is a satellite going around the moon and taking lots and lots of photographs of the moon. Because you remember in 1969, they actually launched a satellite, and eventually they sent a man to the moon. You remember two men walked on the moon. Well, they wanted to know what the various volcanoes and craters in the moon were like, so they sent this orbiting satellite to take lots and lots of photographs, and they sent those images to the special NASA research laboratory, to those two people on that photograph you're seeing right now. And the central one is Dr. John Jackson, who is a nuclear physicist. And you can see on the left of that picture, let's look for image number 14 again. If we can look at image 14, on the left is a space research picture of a man in space, and on the right is the Shroud of Turin. Now, the Shroud of Turin has always been very, very controversial. So somebody had the bright idea of putting the Shroud of Turin under the VP8 image analyzing computer. And this is what they saw. They saw three-dimensional encoding, so that under the VP8 image analyzing computer, they saw a three-dimensional face, and they were absolutely stunned. I want to tell you right away, there is no other two-dimensional image on planet Earth that has three-dimensional encoding in it. Let's look at the next picture, number 16. There is, again, the three-dimensional body of Jesus. Let me tell you and reinforce once again, there is no other two-dimensional piece of cloth or image of any sort that has three-dimensional encoding within it. For the more technical amongst you, if you take there were a lot of photographs taken of the Shroud in 1931, and normally, you would expect that photograph to have about 300 megabytes of information on it. Actually, that particular photograph has over a gigabyte of information, which means it has more than 3 times as much as it should have. The rest of the information is actually dimensional encoding on the shroud, and nobody knows exactly how it got there. The purpose of this program is to explain to you how I believe that a three-dimensional encoding got there. Image number 17 is an image of the linen cloth, the shroud, over the body of the person within the shroud, who I believe was Jesus. I believe Jesus gave off radiation. So, for example, if that was the nose of Jesus, the radiation from the nose scorched the shroud near the nose, but if the lower part is the eye, which in medical terms we would call the orbit, there would be less radiation from the eye. Let's move on and you'll understand what I'm talking about. I want to show you now an image collimator. That is something you probably won't have heard of. It's an instrument used to focus light rays. Now, in order to make a Shroud of Turin, what you actually need is a nuclear collimator with three-dimensional encoding properties. And let me tell you that a nuclear collimator with three-dimensional encoding properties is not available on planet Earth. There is no such apparatus on planet Earth. It hasn't been designed yet. Nobody can do this. Nobody today, given unlimited funds, can make the Shroud of Turin, or anything even remotely like it. Let's look at the next picture, which is number 19, the Hubble Space Telescope. That was launched in 1990. They started work in 1970. It took them 20 years to design it and launch it. And that technology is available. And I believe Leonardo da Vinci was so clever that he could have created, designed, and launched the Hubble Space Telescope because the technology is available today. However, I do not believe it's possible for Leonardo da Vinci or NASA technicians or anybody on planet Earth to create a three-dimensional Shroud of Turin. Let's move on now and move to the next picture, which is number 20. First thing people say is the Shroud of Turin is not in the Bible, and that's another reason why people say they're not interested in the Shroud of Turin. This is an image of Lazarus after Jesus raised him from the dead. And you'll notice that Lazarus is wound in bandages. If we go to I'm not going to read out all the text because it'd take too long, but in John 11, verses 43 and 44, we're told that Lazarus was wound in grave clothes. There is the grave clothes, kairos. The Greek is kairos, and basically they are bandages. So when Lazarus came out of the tomb, his body was wrapped in kairos. In fact, on Easter Sunday morning, the two Marys were going to go and anoint the body of Jesus with ointment and bury him properly with kairos or grave clothes in the same way as Lazarus. But it took about 6 hours. Right, let's move on now. The next picture I want to show you is a sudarium. When we're told in the New Testament, when Lazarus came out of the tomb, he had a sudarium, like a handkerchief or a napkin, over his face. Now, we know what a sudarion is, because that word appears in the New Testament in Acts 19. We're told in Acts 19, verse 11, that Paul handed out handkerchiefs and aprons that had touched his skin, and they were carried away to the sick, and their diseases left them, and the evil spirits came out of them. So what Paul did in Acts 19 was to use sudarium, in other words, napkins made of linen, and gave them to sick people, and they were healed. So we know it's a sudarium. So the traditional Jewish burial is to put a napkin over the face, and the whole body would be wound in bandages. Now, did this happen to Jesus? No, it didn't. Let's look at the next picture, image 23. Image 23 we're looking at now. Now, when Jesus was taken down from the cross, which was a very gruesome business, there was only 3 hours between 3 o'clock in the afternoon and the start of Passover at 6 o'clock that evening in which to bury Jesus. So they had to do something very quickly. They didn't have time to put him in the normal grave clothes. They put him in a huge cloth. And there are two separate words used in the New Testament for that large piece of cloth. In John 20, verse 6, it says this: Simon Peter came following him and went into the tomb, and he saw there the linen cloths, the Greek is orthonia, lying there, and the handkerchief, the sudarium in Greek, that had been around his head. So Peter actually saw two pieces of cloth. One was an orthonia and one was a sudarium. We've already looked at sudarium. We know what that is. That's like a napkin or an apron. That was over his face. When somebody dies, either in a hospital or a battlefield or a car accident or anything else, even today you will cover the face. And that's the very first thing they did. As soon as Jesus came off the cross, they covered his face with a napkin, a linen napkin. But then they cover the rest of his body with this thing in Greek called an orthonia. Now, the thing, when you study the New Testament, it's very good to have a Greek lexicon with you so that you can find out what these words actually mean. There are two words. One is a syndon and one is an orthonia. I want to go to the word syndon first. In Mark 15, verse 46, it says that he bought fine linen, the word is syndon, took him down and wrapped him, that's Jesus, in the linen, and the Greek word is syndon. So we want to know exactly what Jesus was buried in. Well, we know what syndon is if we look elsewhere in the New Testament. Let's look at image number 24 now. Now there is a picture of Mark who wrote the Gospel of Mark, or to whom it's attributed, fleeing the Garden of Gethsemane, leaving behind him a cloak which covered his whole body, it's blue in that picture, called a syndon. We're told about that in Mark 14, verse 51. A young man wearing nothing but a linen garment, a syndon, was following Jesus. And when they seized him, he fled naked, leaving the garment, the syndon, behind. So Jesus was buried in something like Mark was wearing in the Garden of Gethsemane. Right, let's move on to this other word, orthonia. In Luke 24, it says, Peter arose and ran to the tomb, and stooping down, he saw the linen cloths, the orthonia, lying by themselves. So we might ask, well, what does that word orthonia actually mean? And we do the same. We have to look and find out where that word is used in the New Testament. Let's look at image number 25. Actually, Peter, in the New Testament, had a vision which involved a great sheet coming down called an orthonia. So in image 26, Jesus was buried in a great sheet or a large piece of cloth suitable for covering a person such as Mark. So a shroud is definitely in the New Testament. Now, this is confirmed that the shroud is an ancient piece of linen by the next picture, image number 27, a wonderful lady called Mestil Fleury Lemberg, who is a world authority on ancient textiles. She was the former curator of the Swiss Abegg Foundation Textile Museum. She has various technical things to say, but what she actually says in image number 28 is that the piece of the linen is actually a very precious piece of ancient linen woven on the same cloth as another ancient linen found in Masada, woven on the same loom. So we know that that is a first century linen, not only for this reason, for other ones I'm coming to. We're now going to look at a forensic examination of the shroud by image number 29, Dr. Robert Bucklin, who is a forensic pathologist who's gone to be with the Lord now. He's actually, in his lifetime, did over 25,000 postmortems. In America, they call them autopsies. But he found lots of things, and we're going to look very quickly at what he found. Image number 30, there is the Shroud of Turin, the front and the back, and you can see, we're going to look at it a bit more closely, lots and lots of scourging marks. Let's look at the front more closely in image 31. What you can see there is lots of scourging marks. Remember, Jesus was scourged and all of his skin was ripped off. You can see the crown of thorns with the blood tracking down, and you can see the marks in the wrists there on the shroud. Let's look at image number 32 now. there was blood flowing from the scalp. Now, that is clearly on the shroud, and actually on the original shroud, it's bright red with lots of bilirubin in it, which is given off by tortured people, and that's why it's bright red. It's bright red on the shroud. On that particular photo-positive image, the blood is in photo-negative. Right, next picture. Dr. Robert Bucklin noticed that the nasal cartilages had been fractured, and there was lots of bruising around the face where I believe Jesus had been bullied by 480 members, 480 soldiers, as I described in the talk on the crucifixion. Let's look at the next picture, number 34. He noticed that there was a large collection of blood around the right chest wall, and that's where the lance was placed between the 5th and 6th right ribs by the soldier at Golgotha, making sure that Jesus was truly dead. Let's look at the next picture now. This is image 35. There are the nails in the wrists in Desktop's point. Remember that actually the nails didn't go through the palms of the hand, but through the wrists. And the next picture, there actually in image number 36 is Desktop's point. That is actually where the nail went in, and you can actually feel in the back of your own hand a little place where you can put your thumb in on the back of your wrist, and that's where the nail went through Jesus' wrists. Image number 37, when Jesus hung on the cross, his hands became rather like claws, and his thumb was what we call pronated, in other words, flexed inwards, and that's why on the shroud the thumbs appear to be missing. Image number 38 is the nailing of the feet. And image number 38, you can see that some blood tracking down onto the shroud from the blood around the feet. Next picture now, we're looking at the image 39. We're looking at the back of the shroud now. And what you can see there is lots of scourge marks, lots and lots of scourge marks, because remember, Jesus was whipped with basically a cat and nine tails called a flagrum, and his skin was ripped off, and you can see that he has scourge marks on his back and on his legs. In fact, it says in Isaiah 52 that he was unrecognizable on the cross. Let's look at image number 40. Jesus was carrying the heavy crossbeam, and in fact there's bruising over the back, over his shoulders on the Shroud of Turin. Finally, Dr. Bucklin actually concluded, from all of this data, it's not an unreasonable conclusion for the forensic pathologist to determine that only one person in history has undergone the sequence of events as described. That person is Jesus Christ. So that's what Dr. Bucklin actually says. What you're looking at now is actually Dr. Max Fry, who's a pollen specialist, a member of the STIRP team, Dr. Max Fry, and he's actually a botanist, and he found lots and lots of pollen and spores on the shroud. Let's look at image 42, spores on the shroud. He found in 1973 and 1978, he took lots of samples from the shroud, and he found that it had lots and lots of different spores and pollen of plants found only in Jerusalem. Now, the next picture is image number 43, and that's Dr. Avinoam Danin, a botany professor at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And he was shown the Shroud of Turin. I haven't got time to describe his detailed discoveries. He found various spores on it. Let's look at the next picture, number 44. He found Zygophyllum dumosum, the spores of that plant. And he found the spores of a next plant, which is 45, Guandelia 2040. And he said that the shroud definitely came from Jerusalem. That's what he says. The Shroud of Turin came from Jerusalem. So we got halfway through describing the Shroud of Turin. I hope you're interested in this. If you're interested, please write to me at info@Revelation TV. There's more information on my website, which is freechristianteaching.org. And please don't miss the next part, which is all about the resurrection of Jesus Christ and how that image got onto the shroud.
Who taught the sun where to stand in the morning? And who taught the ocean you can only come this far? And who taught the moon where to hide till evening? Whose words alone can catch a falling star? I know my Redeemer lives.
Peace be with you. As the Father sent me, so I send you.
Welcome to The Point. This is part 2 of a 2-part series on the Shroud of Turin. Now, I have to tell you that virtually everybody thinks that the Shroud of Turin is a fraud, mainly because of the radiocarbon dating, which dated it around about 1325 AD. I've already explained in part 1 that I don't think the Shroud of Turin could possibly be a fraud because it's got 3-dimensional properties and X-ray properties. The 3-dimensional properties in particular cannot be reproduced by anybody today. Nobody on planet Earth can put 3-dimensional properties into a 2-dimensional cloth. The Shroud of Turin is unique on planet Earth. Now, most people think the Shroud of Turin is a fraud, but you have to remember most people think God is a fraud too. So I want to open your mind and just make up your own mind. Personally, I believe that the Shroud of Turin proves the resurrection of Jesus Christ and that the image on the shroud was caused by a burst of radiation given off at the resurrection of Jesus Christ. But I don't want you to take my word for it. It doesn't say that in the Bible. I do not need, and nor do you need, the Shroud of Turin for our faith. However, there are a lot of unbelievers out there, and if this is true, this would be a very useful tool to convince them of the authenticity of the Bible and the fact that Jesus Christ, the Messiah, rose from the dead. Right, we're going to start with image 46. Those of you who've been to the Garden Tomb in Jerusalem, which I believe is the tomb in which Jesus was actually buried, will have seen inside the Garden Tomb the limestone tomb, image number 46, please, in which Jesus was buried. Now, the actual limestone of that tomb is a particular type of stone which is only found in ancient tombs in Jerusalem and nowhere else known on planet Earth. It's actually called travertine aragonite. Now, 2 scientists called Joseph Colbeck and Richard Levi-Setti, American scientists, they found that there were traces of this particular very rare limestone on the shroud. They found some of these on the nose of the shroud, the left kneecap, and both heels. And they say that the Shroud of Turin was definitely in Jerusalem because they don't know anywhere else on planet Earth where travertine aragonite is found. We're going to move on now to the coins over the eyes, where it gets even more interesting. So let's look at the next picture, which is Professor Alan Wanger of Duke University, USA, who has developed some very, very clever photo imaging techniques, overlay techniques they're called, and he discovered that over the eyes of the shroud are little rounded objects which, if you examine very closely, turn out to be coins minted by Pontius Pilate in AD 29. Jesus was probably crucified around AD 33. Most people believe that date. And if Professor Alan Wanger is correct, these coins actually date the shroud. Let's look at the next picture. I haven't got time to go into great detail. That's image number 47. Those are the coins over the eyes. You can actually search this online. You can actually look on my website as well, freechristianteaching.org, to learn a lot more about the coins over the eyes. Image 48 are the various widow's mites. Jesus talked about the widow's mite, but actually there were 3 types of leptons or widow's mites minted by Pontius Pilate in 3 consecutive years, AD 29, AD 30, and AD 31. But what Professor Alan Wanger, who's an emeritus professor, has said that undoubtedly the coins over the left and right eye are 2 separate coins minted by Pontius Pilate in AD 29. So if that's correct, that dates the shroud. Further evidence of the shroud is another shroud. You remember in the first program I talked about the sudarium, which was the linen cloth over the face of Jesus. Now that shroud, the sudarium of Oviedo over the face of Jesus, is actually in a wooden or oak chest in Oviedo in Spain. And again, Dr. Alan Wanger has studied that and found that the blood type is type AB, which on both the Shroud of Turin and the Shroud of Oviedo, and the blood marks exactly match the the blood marks on the Sidarim of Oviedo exactly match the Shroud of Turin, which mean they were both placed over the same corpse. That is very, very significant, because the history of the Sidarim of Oviedo in Spain is actually very well known. Remember that image 50, we talked about the 2 burial cloths of Jesus Christ, that he had a Sidarim around his head, a linen napkin, and then was placed in a large piece of cloth. In the Bible, it's called an athonia or a sindon, a large piece of cloth which covered his whole body. But you can see over his face, he had 2 pieces of cloth. And the point is that the blood markings match both pieces of cloth. Now, we're actually getting on to how did that image get there? Well, we now know how the image got there because of the work, the amazing work in image 51 of Dr. August Aceta. Let's see Dr. August Aceta in image 51. Now, he's a radiologist who lives in California. He works with X-rays professionally as a living. And he decided that the shroud was basically similar to an X-ray, but obviously more advanced. He looked at image 52, and he noticed, if we can look at image 52, that the hands appeared to be like X-rays. So he thought that the whole of the shroud image was caused by radiation. What he actually did was quite complex, but he ended up with image number 53, which is he injected himself with radioactive material, stood in front of an X-ray plate, and then put the plate in front of the VPA image analyzing computer, and for the first time in history produced a 3-dimensional image from a 2-dimensional X-ray. That's what he actually did. So he proved that the image on the shroud was actually caused by radiation. That's so important, I'm going to repeat it. The image on the shroud has been scientifically proved to be caused by radiation. There is no paint on the shroud whatever. It is caused by radiation, nuclear radiation. Let's move on now. Image number 54, just to reinforce the point, is that the image on the shroud is caused by a blast of radiation, which would include gamma rays, X-rays, infrared, and lots of other light rays as well. Right. I want now to move away from science to study the scriptures and not look at the resurrection, but at the transfiguration. Let's look at image 55, which is the transfiguration. This is described in Matthew 17, verses 1 to 3. I'm just going to read that verse to you. Now, after 6 days, in other words, on the 7th day, and God is a God of 7, so on the 7th day, something really important happened, and this is what happened. Jesus took Peter, James, and John, his brother, led them up on a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as light. And Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him, and that's what happened. That's the transfiguration. Right, let's look at the next picture now. Now, it says in image 56 that his face shone like the sun at noon. Very, very bright. And we're told that the light shone through his clothes. Also, we're told in image 57 that 2 Old Testament characters, image 57, Moses and Elijah, appeared with Jesus. Of course, Moses had died and Elijah had been taken up to heaven on a chariot of fire, and they were Old Testament saints. But there they are appearing with Jesus. So I think you'll agree with me that Jesus is now in eternity. Right, now this is where it gets really interesting, because in image 58, we're told that God is clothed in light. In 1 John 1, verse 5, it says, God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. And in Psalm 104, first 2 verses, it says that God is clothed in light. So what exactly happened at the transfiguration? Well, the answer is I don't actually know. But I've got a theory, and you can listen to my theory and decide whether I'm right or wrong. Image 59 is Albert Einstein's famous equation. I expect you've heard of it. It's called E = mc². Don't worry, relax. I'm not going to try and make life really difficult for you from a scientific point of view. All you need to know is there is a relationship between energy, mass, and the speed of light. Now, in experimental physics, if you are moving at the speed of light, then time ceases to exist. There is no time in eternity. So something obviously happened to Jesus' body. It's probably better if you look at me now if I try and explain it. Something happened to Jesus' body at the transfiguration. The atoms of his body were moving at the speed of light, and Jesus was actually in eternity with Moses and Elijah because the atoms of his body were moving at the speed of light. I haven't been to eternity, and nor has anybody else I know other than Jesus Christ. Moses and Elijah obviously had. However, it is possible that when we die and our spirit leaves our body and we're in eternity and there's no time, that the molecules of our body are moving at the speed of light. That is from theoretical physics, and I can't prove it to you, and nor can anybody else. Now we're going to look at something else very interesting in the Old Testament, image number 60. This is Moses going up Mount Sinai to receive the Ten Commandments from God. He came face to face with God, and not many people survived that, but Moses did. When he came down in image 61, his face glowed with light. We need to see image 61 now. The face of Moses glowing with light. Now, it lasted a few days, and then it wore off. So when you come into contact with God, your face shines with light. And here I'm taking a leap of faith here and saying that the Shroud of Turin was in contact with the resurrected Jesus Christ and glowed with light, which may be how the image actually got onto the shroud in the first place. Image number 62 is images those are photons, they're subatomic particles, and they make up light. Light is made up of photons moving in a waveform. The next picture, I want to make it very simple for you and try not to make this too complicated. Image 63 is what you see if you hang a linen garment up in the window. You see light shining through the linen garments. And that's what the disciples saw at the Transfiguration. They saw a bright light shining through the garments. Right, let's move on now to the time scale. Image 64, the blood marks were on that shroud before the scorch marks and the resurrection marks. And that's actually quite important because if you were a fraudulent artist, normally you would do the image of the body first and then put the blood marks on afterwards. But no, in the case of the shroud, the blood marks were definitely on there first because there are no scorch marks underneath the blood. Right, let's look at the next picture, number 65. That's a photograph of photopositive on the left, photonegative on the left on the original shroud with blood in it. You can see the blood tracking down from the top of the head where the crown of thorns was, and that is bright red blood with bilirubin in it. When you take a photograph of that, you get the image on the right, which is a photopositive image, except the blood is now in photonegative. So the Shroud of Turin is actually a mixed photopositive and photonegative image. Now we're going to move on to carbon dating, which is where life gets really difficult. And at this point, most people give up and say the shroud is a fraud. I actually do not discount the Shroud of Turin at all. I just think what was discovered by the carbon dating has simply been not interpreted correctly. Let's move on now. In the British Museum, in image 67, three famous people got up and said the date of the shroud is 1260 to 1390. Therefore, the Shroud of Turin is a fraud. That's basically what most people know about the shroud. It is a fraud according to carbon dating. So I want to now look at carbon dating. Before we do that, I want to remind you in image 68, that the shroud has three-dimensional properties in it. We do need image, that's the one before that, image 68, three-dimensional properties, if we can see it, on the shroud. If you remember from my first lecture on this subject, three-dimensional properties cannot be made by anybody. The next picture, a medical doctor, that's me, a cartoon of a medical doctor. Now, it quite often happens that doctors take tests and one is remarkably different from all the others. Let's look at the next one, which is a picture of lots of shoes, image 69, and sometimes you take a test on various people and find one is completely different. In fact, for example, sometimes you take lots of tests and one shows that the patient is very ill and ought to be dead. Well, what you actually do in medicine is you say, well, let's have a look at this other test and see if there's any other interpretation. And that's what I think we should do with carbon dating. Right, next picture, please, image 70. You've probably heard of the periodic table in image 70. Carbon is one of the 118 elements. Now, in image 71, there are three types of carbon. You've probably heard of carbon-12, but there are isotopes, radioactive isotopes called C13 and C14. Those are the radioactive images. There's the picture of the radioactive C13 and C14. And I'm going to very quickly try and attempt to explain to you, though it doesn't really matter, how radioactive C14 is formed in the next picture, number 72. What happens is nuclear radiation, cosmic rays from the sun, bombard nitrogen and produce radioactive C14, which gets incorporated into carbon dioxide and filters down through the atmosphere and is taken up by the plants and the animals and you and me as well. So we are very slightly radioactive, all of us. Now, next picture, importantly, is that the shroud, number 73, the shroud is made of linen, and linen is made of flax. Right, next picture is image 74, is how linen is actually made in an old-fashioned loom. You get some flax and you make some linen. Now we get to the crunch point for carbon dating. There is a graph in image 75 of radiocarbon dating. And at the top on the right, you can see the number 16 there. And I want to make it very simple for you. Supposing, it's not possible, but supposing I had 16 grams of radioactive C14, and I waited 5,730 years. After 5,730 years, half of it would have degraded back to nitrogen again. That's called the half-life. All radiocarbon dating is based on what's called half-life of carbon. Now, I want to try and make it really simple for you by showing you image 76. Now, that is an image of the shroud, but I've turned up the contrast so it appears on purpose, so it appears very, very bright. Now, what the carbon dating scientists found in 3 separate laboratories is that the shroud is highly radioactive. I'll say that again, the shroud is highly radioactive, and using their normal criteria, it is dated around about 1325. They gave a range between 1260 and 1390, but let's say 1325. What they found was a very radioactive shroud. Next picture, please, is what they expect to find in a first century shroud produced around about AD 33. All of the carbon would have degraded to nitrogen, and it wouldn't be radioactive at all. So what they expected to find was not a radioactive shroud, but a shroud with very little radioactivity on it. Now, this is absolutely crucial, so I'm going to repeat it, because this is fundamental to the understanding of the Shroud of Turin. So let's look at the next picture, which is 78. There is what they actually found was a highly radioactive shroud, and they dated it at 1325. And here's what in image 79, is what they expected to find. The next picture is not a radioactive shroud, but a first century shroud with no radioactivity at all. So what they found is a highly radioactive shroud. Let's look at the next picture, which is number 80. There's the image burnt on the shroud by radioactivity on the left, a photonegative image, and there's the photopositive on the right. There in image 81 are the X-ray appearances burnt on the shroud by radiation. There is the next picture, image 82, the three-dimensional qualities which nobody on planet Earth can do. Here is the next picture, image 83, a highly radioactive shroud suggesting that its date ought to be 1325 according to conventional radioactive carbon dating. But this particular shroud is described in the Bible as a sidarium and a syndon, and in image 84, this particular shroud, we need image 84, has been through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, has been through a radioactive process. Now, the fact that that shroud is radioactive suggests to me something really exciting, that the resurrection happened and caused an image on the shroud. You remember in image 85, we need image 85 now, Dr. Aceta proved that the image was caused by radiation. So what I've been telling you now is that Jesus has resurrected from the dead and left behind him a parable which can only be understood by a believer who believes in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. The people who dated the shroud clearly do not understand the resurrection. They don't understand the transfiguration. They don't understand the resurrection either. They did not expect to find a radioactive shroud, but they did find a radioactive shroud dated They dated it 1325 according to the methods they normally use. But this was no ordinary shroud. Had they dated the shroud and it hadn't been through the resurrection, they would have found a shroud with no radioactivity on it at all. But they found a highly radioactive shroud, and we know it's got X-ray properties and photo and three-dimensional properties, proving to me that it's been through a nuclear process called the resurrection. Image 87 is a Nobel Prize-winning nuclear physicist called Isabel Picek. You can look her up on the internet if you like. She's a particle physicist and very, very highly respected. And this is what she says in image 88, is that the actual resurrection, which the image on the shroud was caused during an event horizon. That's something you've probably never heard of before. It's something when the laws of physics cease to exist. It happens several times in the Bible, and I'm going to be doing a special program on event horizons. This is what she says. At the formation of the image on the shroud, there was an event horizon when the body of Jesus was suspended in space with zero gravity. She says there was no gravity, no entropy, no gravitational collapse, no time, and no space. And she says this conforms to no known laws of physics. Image 89 is a representation of an event horizon. This happened at creation. It happened, I believe, at the resurrection. It happened several times in the Bible, including the transfiguration. So what does Jesus look like? Well, image 90, people have made models from the shroud, and this is maybe what he looked like. We don't really know. But I think this next picture is to me, more convincing. Image 91, the next picture is image 91, and this is an image created directly from the shroud, and I believe that's what Jesus looked like. Now, if you go to Jerusalem and go to the garden tomb, which is image number 92, that garden tomb is empty. There's no body there. Jesus' body was there for 3 days and 3 nights. Joseph of Arimathea lent it to him for 3 days and 3 nights. His body's not there anymore. On the door is this notice. In the next image, which is actually number 93, it says on the door, he is not here, for he is risen. Image 94, Jesus Christ is in heaven right now, in the third heaven, outside space-time, sitting at the right hand of God. Right, I've finished showing you photographs now, and I expect you have got all sorts of questions. Please write to me at info@revelationtv.com. If you can actually, that's great. If you can write to me at info@revelationtv.com. I do have a website, freechristianteaching.org, and there's a great deal of information on the Shroud of Turin. I'm going to be, if you would like me to, I will make a whole series of program on the Shroud of Turin. I do have a problem. Most people think it's a fraud. I don't. I think it proves the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Anyway, it's lovely to have you with us on the To The Point, this program. I know it's a little bit technical. My program's a little bit too technical for some, but personally, I think this stuff is all really exciting, and we'd love to have you with us. Do stay around for the next To The Point. God bless you, and bye-bye now.